Before going any further and hearing from legal experts who sharply differ on this question, it's worth laying down the law, as it were. It's drawn from Title 18 of the United States Code, Section 1503, and at least two other related sections. The relevant language in condensed form reads, "Whoever corruptly endeavors to influence, intimidate, or impede the due administration of justice shall be punished." Keep that in mind as we go along tonight. And to that point, here are two portions from the hearing, both centered on the moment during Director Comey's Valentine's Day meeting in the Oval Office when he says the president asked him to drop the investigation of fired National Security Advisor Michael Flynn. First, Idaho Republican Senator James Jarish highlighting what he seems to see as Trump-friendly language in the Director Comey's account, and Director Comey pushing back.
He did not direct you to let it go.
Not in his words, no.
He did not order you to let it go.
Again, those words are not an order.
No. He said, "I hope." Now, like me, you probably did hundreds of cases, maybe thousands of cases, charging people with criminal offenses. And of course, you have knowledge of the thousands of cases out there that where people have been charged. Do you know of any case where a person has been charged for obstruction of justice, or for that matter, any other criminal offense, where they said or thought they hoped for an outcome?
I don't know well enough to answer. And the reason I keep saying his words is I took it as a direction.
Right.
I mean, this is the President of the United States with me alone saying, I hope this. I took it as this is what he wants me to do.
We're going to hear more from Senator Risch shortly. Now here's Committee Vice Chairman, Democrat Mark Warner of Virginia, drawing attention to something he sees as potentially ominous.
You were in a meeting, and your direct superior, the Attorney General, was in that meeting as well, yet the President asked everyone to leave, including the Attorney General to leave, before he brought up the matter of General Flynn. What was your impression of that type of action? And have you ever seen anything like that before?
No. My impression was something big is about to happen. I need to remember every single word that is spoken. And again, I could be wrong. I'm 56 years old. I've been seen a few things. My sense was the Attorney General knew he shouldn't be leaving, which is why he was lingering. And I don't know Mr. Kushner well, but I think he picked up on the same thing. And so I knew something was about to happen that I needed to pay very close attention to.
We're going to be playing you all the key moments from the hearing over the next 2 hours tonight. But first, let's bring in CNN Chief National Security Correspondent Jim Sciutto, who's got the latest, starting with the breaking news from the closed classified session that Director Comey gave after the public one. What have you learned?
That's right. Myself and my colleagues Manu Raju and Evan Perez are learning that in the classified session this afternoon that Director Comey, or fired Director Comey, told senators of a possible third undisclosed meeting between Attorney General Jeff Sessions and the Russian ambassador to the U.S., Sergei Kislyak. This based on intercepted Russian-to-Russian conversations discussing that meeting. I should note that CNN was the first to report this investigation last week, that Congress was looking into a possible third meeting. It relates to April 2016 at the Mayflower Hotel, and this helps explain a somewhat cryptic answer that Director Comey gave in the public session earlier today when asked about Attorney General Sessions. Have a listen.
Our judgment, as I recall, was that he was very close to and inevitably going to recuse himself for a variety of reasons. We also were aware of facts that I can't discuss in an open setting that would make his continued engagement in a Russia-related investigation problematic.
What problematic, apparently, was that he did not disclose yet again a meeting with Russia's ambassador to U.S. They're still investigating that, but they have some raw intelligence, these Russian-to-Russian intercepts, that indicate to them there may have been a third private meeting.
And in terms of the hearing today, I mean, the former Director Comey forewent publicly reading his opening remarks. A lot of people assumed he would be reading them.
That's right. You know, those prepared remarks read somewhat like an affidavit. You know, it was very detailed. It was going through dates and names and times to document conversations with the president. His opening statement today, which was delivered off the cuff, although I'm sure he prepared for it, he seemed to speak more from his heart. And it didn't take him longer than 2.5 minutes before he first mentioned the word lie, accusing the president of lying. And he went on to use that very same word many times. Have a listen.
I knew that there might come a day when I would need a record of what had happened, not just to defend myself, but to defend the FBI and our integrity as an institution and the independence of our investigative function. I was honestly concerned that he might lie about the nature of our meeting, and so I thought it really important to document.
Important to document, and then he went on to give details that after that famous tweet, I hope there aren't tapes of this conversation, that he then felt the need to leak the contents of those memos through a friend of his, a professor at Columbia, to get it out into the public record. And then he again, as you mentioned before on the air earlier today, with the intention of having a special counsel being appointed, which is of course what happened.
Right, and now the private attorney for President Trump is saying, but gave a press conference, just made a public statement saying that those were privileged communications.
Exactly, although we should note that the president referenced those communications himself in public statements prior.
Yeah, we'll have more on that coming up. Jim, thanks very much. So far, the president has not done what he so often does. He's not tweeted about the day's hearings, which is frankly pretty remarkable because he often refers to himself as a counterpuncher, and being called a liar is quite a punch. However, his personal attorney, as we said, has responded. CNN Sarah Murray joins us now from the White House with that and more. Did the president have any response to Comey today?
Well, we saw a much more restrained President Trump. I mean, there were some rumors he might live tweet the testimony. He didn't do that. He did not respond to reporters who tried to ask him about the testimony later on in the day. He did make sort of a veiled hint to it when he was speaking at a conference in front of evangelicals, essentially saying we are all under siege and promising that he's going to keep hunker down and keep fighting. But I am told by Sean Spicer, the White House press secretary, that the president didn't actually watch all that much of Comey's testimony today. He was in meetings for much of the morning and essentially went right from there to the speech. Did he see clips? Of course. Will he be watching tonight? I think that's a safe bet, but he wasn't exactly glued to the television watching it in real time earlier today, Anderson.
And as you said, the president's lawyer, Mark Kasowitz, backed up his statement from yesterday that the president feels totally vindicated. He also suggested that some parts of Comey's testimony were not true.
That's right. So on the one hand, he looked at Comey's testimony and said the president is vindicated. Comey said that the president was not under investigation when he was the FBI director. Trump's lawyer said that there was no indication that Trump tried to block any kind of investigation. But then he went on to hit Comey as a leaker. Listen.
Mr. Comey also admitted that there is no evidence that a single vote changed as a result of any Russian interference. Mr. Comey's testimony also makes clear that the president never sought to impede the investigation into attempted Russian interference in the 2016 election. Mr. Comey admitted that he leaked to friends of his purported memos of those privileged communications, one of which he testified was classified. Mr. Comey also testified that immediately after he was terminated, he authorized his friends to leak the contents of those memos to the press in order to, in Mr. Comey's words, quote, prompt the appointment of a special counsel, close quote.
So, Anderson, on the one hand, they're looking at Comey as a credible witness because he said the president was not under investigation at certain points. On the other hand, they're questioning his credibility. They took issue with a number of things Comey said in his testimony. They're denying, for instance, that Trump ever demanded loyalty from James Comey. And they're also denying that President Trump ever asked Comey to back off on this investigation into former National Security Advisor Michael Flynn.
As we said, one of the big pieces of news was Director Comey saying he thinks that the president and his team are liars. The White House was insisting the president is not a liar.
Well, certainly not a good day when you have to make that statement as a White House spokesperson, and that's what we saw Sarah Huckabee Sanders do today. She said the president is not a liar, that it's insulting to even bring that up. She had a pretty fierce statement on that front, but when she was asked about something else James Comey mentioned, the prospect of whether there is a recording system in this White House, whether there are tapes of his conversation with the president, she did not answer that. She said she has no idea if there's a taping system in the White House. You can bet, though, Anderson, that question is not going to be going away.
Yeah, although certainly she could find out the answer. Sarah Murray, thanks very much on that. We are fortunate to have 3 senators from the Intelligence Committee on the program tonight. Joining us right now is Senator Angus King, independent of Maine. Before we talk, though, I want to play the key moments from his questioning today.
With regard to the several of these conversations, in his interview with Lester Holt on NBC, the president said, I had dinner with him. He wanted to have dinner because he wanted to stay on. Is this an accurate statement?
No, sir.
Did you in any way initiate that dinner?
No. He called me at my desk at lunchtime and asked me, was I free for dinner that night? and called himself and said, can you come over for dinner tonight?
In that same interview, the president said, in one case I called him and in one case he called me. Is that an accurate statement?
No.
And in his press conference on May 18th, the president was asked whether he had urged you to shut down the investigation into Michael Flynn. The president responded, quote, no, no. Next question. Is that an accurate statement?
I don't believe it is.
In terms of his comments to you about, I think in response to Mr. Risch, Senator Risch, he said, I hope you will hold back on that. But when you get when a president of the United States in the Oval Office says something like I hope or I suggest or would you, do you take that as a directive?
Yes. Yes, it rings in my ear as kind of, will no one rid me of this meddlesome priest?
I was just going to quote that in 1170, December 29, Henry II said, who will rid me of this meddlesome priest? And then the next day he was killed. Thomas à Becket. That's exactly the same situation. We're thinking along the same lines.
And Senator Angus King joins us now. It was interesting to hear Director Comey and you both seizing on that line from Henry II.
And it wasn't rehearsed, I promise. It came to me as I was listening to Jim Risch's question about the power of the word of the sovereign, or in this case the president, in that kind of situation. And it was, I had looked it up to get the date, and lo and behold, Jim Comey had arrived at the same conclusion.
So when Senator Risch focuses on the word hope, that the fact that it was the president saying, well, I hope you can do this, I hope, he was indicating, well, that's not a directive. That's not the president saying do this, just saying he hopes this.
Right.
Do you buy that? I mean, if somebody who's in a powerful position, you know, looks you in the eye alone in the office and says, I hope you can do this.
This isn't somebody in a powerful position. This is the President of the United States in the Oval Office with you alone. And I think Mr. Comey's response was what would be almost all of us, and this is something the president wants done. And that's exactly what Henry II said when he said, will no one rid me of this meddlesome priest?
Does the intent matter? I mean, if the president was saying, even as a directive, look, drop this case, cut my friend some slack, is that different than if he directed Comey to drop the case as some sort of cover-up?
Well, it's hard, you know, intent is a very difficult matter. And by the way, this whole question of what did the president do and did it rise to the level of some kind of violation of law is really squarely in the lane of the special counsel. That's what they're going to be looking at. Our committee is a fact-finding committee, and it's part of our work, but it's not the whole deal. But I think one of the most significant things that came across today was this moment, and you played it with Mark Warner, where the president was in the Oval Office with a group of people, including Mr. Comey, including the Attorney General and Jared Kushner and others, and the president said, "Everybody out," including the Attorney General, closed the door alone with Mr. Comey.
No, he said it once, said it several times. Kushner lingered, and then Rice Priebus popped his head in also.
We want you out. And that tells me that the president knew that what he was going to be discussing had some extraordinary significance. Otherwise, it would have just been part of the meeting. And I think that makes it hard for the president to argue that, well, I didn't really intend it and it was just a casual conversation.
The other thing that Senator Risch was making the point of was that Jim Comey should have done something either in that moment or gone to Congress or gone to somebody to warn, to raise red flags.
And I don't think that's an illegitimate point. And Comey conceded that. He said, you know, in 20/20 hindsight, perhaps I should have gone. He did go back and talk to the top echelons at the FBI about it. He did share that information with the leadership of the FBI. He didn't share it with the Attorney General because he was concerned about, I believe, where the Attorney General stood in all of this. But he did share it with the FBI. But yes, I mean, you can say in 20/20 hindsight he should have perhaps resigned or gone to the Attorney General directly. He did spend a lot of time trying to get the Attorney General and others to form a barrier, to explain to the president this wasn't really appropriate to be meeting one-on-one with the head of the FBI.
How does this evolve beyond just a he said, he said? I mean, it seems like, you know, President Trump had sort of teased the idea that there might be tapes. You now have the president's attorney coming out point blank and saying, look, the president never said this stuff. You would think that his attorney wouldn't say that unless he knew that there were not tapes, which would, if they were revealed.
The easiest way to get out of that is if there are tapes to release them. let's get that question clarified. Apparently the White House was equivocal on that, as they were several weeks ago. Let's find out if there were tapes, and if there were, let's have them. That'll end this discussion. Secondly is the question of Mr. Comey's credibility. He has a great deal of credibility, as we've heard in these hearings, and the contemporaneous memos that he wrote, which have probative value in a court. A contemporaneous memo goes to buttress the credibility of the witness, as well as having told other people about these conversations.
Senator, isn't there another way to test who's telling the truth here, which is to see if the president said similar things to other officials in the administration? What about yesterday's hearings?
That was the point of my questions yesterday.
Exactly. I mean, just to introduce what you were saying, you had the Director of National Intelligence, Mr. Coates, you had the head of the NSA, both of whom refused to talk about their conversations on this very subject with President Trump. What would you like to know from them?
Well, I want to know whether they had similar conversations. There's been reported that there were similar conversations about their being asked by the president to somehow curtail or impede or influence the investigation, and that was the purpose of my questions. They didn't answer them. I think they had no good reason.
In fact, D.N.I. Coates acknowledged he had no real legal basis for not answering your question.
No legal basis. It was like, imagine you get home 3 in the morning and your dad says, "Where the heck have you been?" And you say, "Well, I find that an uncomfortable question. I don't think I'm going to answer it." I mean, that was essentially what happened yesterday. That's not going to wash. Now,
but what can you do about it? I mean, you're a senator. How can you get him to answer the question?
Director Coates left the door rather wide open by saying, "I will discuss this in a closed hearing and be more forthcoming." So we're going to make that happen, and so we will be able to ask those questions. And I think the point you're making is, if they had similar conversations about the investigation, as Mr. Comey reported, that certainly goes to buttress his position. Now, it's important to also say, Comey was clear today that he felt that what the president was doing was strictly on the Flynn investigation, not on the entire Russian investigation. Then the question is, isn't Flynn a key part of the overall investigation? And as he alluded in his testimony in the open, if Flynn was guilty of something, a prosecutor might well use him as a witness based upon his unwillingness to go to jail to get evidence in the remaining kind of case. So you can't just read Flynn out of the case.
One of the mysteries that wasn't answered today is why the president was so energetic, apparently, in trying to get Comey to cut some slack for General Flynn. This isn't his habit. He's not, that level, that degree of loyalty to people around him. Is there anything that you've learned either in the hearing today or in classified settings, I know you can't talk about specifics, that would help explain why the president might be so invested in this notion that Flynn get off?
Well, I don't think it's possible to answer that question, at least not at this stage. And again, we're now talking about a lot of issues that the special counsel is going to be following up. We've got all the indications are that the special counsel considers this whole question of the president's relationship to the investigation as part of his investigation. So we're going to find out about that. But in terms of what the motivation, it could be, and it was alluded to today, it could be just the president liked General Flynn and didn't want to see him hurt. I mean, it could be something as simple as that, or it could be an effort to try to impede the overall investigation. That's the question that I think the special counsel is going to have to ask.
Can I just ask you, I know you can't talk about what's in classified settings.
Yeah, but you're going to ask.
No, I'm going to try to work around it and see if you can answer it. You heard Jim Sciutto reporting that you were told that Jeff Sessions had an additional meeting with the Russian ambassador. That's what James Comey told you today. I know you can't confirm that, but broadly, even listening to the public testimony from James Comey today, how concerned are you about